Hello and welcome to today's segment of The Jungle. If you have not watched the video that says intro on it, watch the intro video first. Today we're going to be reading pages 11 and 12 and then skipping to pages 20 and 21. So like I said in the intro, we're going to be skipping around a lot in this book. It's a 400-page book and written very small. We're not going to read the whole thing. But we're going to kind of follow the main character and hit on the main themes that we're reading this for social studies class for. The first thing that I want you to remember is just refresh your memory what the Gilded Age means. This time period in the very late 1800s to the early 1900s is called the Gilded Age because as a verb, to gild something means to take a cheap, lesser material, cover it in to make it look fancy or make it look expensive, like by covering it in gold leaf. But if you just scratch the surface, it's clear that what's underneath is not an expensive material. So this time period is very much like that life looked fantastic for a lot of people in the United States, but really it was a very, very small group. If you just scratch the surface of that and you look at what the life of an average worker was like, it was really, really absolutely miserable. And that was the purpose of this book. Upton Sinclair writes this book about an immigrant family who comes to the United States looking for the American dream, and they are willing to work really, really hard. They have no problem with hard work, but they've been told that the streets in the United States are paved with gold, that everybody has an opportunity to become a rich man in the United States. This myth is that anybody could become president, as opposed to coming from a country where you had to belong to the royal class in order to have anything to do with the government. And these people believe this really strongly, and they come here and they work really, really hard, and they do everything right, and their lives are still absolutely miserable. So Upton Sinclair writes the book to bring about labor reform, to try and help workers to have better lives and get things like an 8-hour workday and stable pay and sick days and stuff like that we take for granted. That doesn't actually end up happening until the late 1930s. Until 1938, we start passing laws about labor reform. What does happen right away, though, is that people are so horrified about what was going into our food supply that they passed the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, right away. With that, then, we're going to go ahead and jump into the story. The very beginning of the book kind of jumps into the story at their wedding, and then it backs up and tells you about how they met. That's the one time that this book really jumps around in time. It won't be a problem other than that. Okay, so we're starting on page 11. In the copy that's scanned in, you can see little brackets where I'll start reading, and I'll read till we get to an end bracket. And you've got my notes in there as well. What I would highly recommend that you do is pause the video right now, go get a piece of paper, a notebook, something where you can take notes on vocab words. This is what you'd be doing during class anyway. We'll stop and talk about vocab words when we get to them. It's not a really technically difficult book, but because it was written in the early 1900s, there's some word usages that you might not be really comfortable with. Okay, so we're starting at the top of page 11. This is jumping in at their wedding reception. Jurgis and Ona are two main characters who've just gotten married in this part of the book, and they threw this big wedding reception. So they start off getting screwed right off the bat, because the idea was that the people who came to the wedding reception and who ate their free food and stuff and had a great time were supposed to leave them some money to kind of cover their expenses. And so they get done with this whole party, and there have been a lot of people there, and they ate a lot of food, and they drank a lot of alcohol, and they didn't leave much money. And so right off the bat, Jurgis and Ona are kind of screwed out of that money. They owe a lot of money for this wedding reception now. This jumps in with a minor character named Jadva. I'm just guessing at that. I apologize if anybody is actually Lithuanian. Please correct me. But I'm going to go with the way that I keep saying it year after year. She's not a main character, but she kind of gives us a little bit of historical feel for this time period and what it would have been like to live then. Then there is Jadva Marcinkus, who is also beautiful, but humble. Jadva likewise paints cans, but then she has an invalid mother and 3 little sisters to support by it, and so she does not spend her wages for shirtwaists. Okay, sorry, I'm going to try and not stop a lot, but there are 3 words right there that we have to go through. First of all, when they're talking about her painting cans, this is a time period before, like on a soup can, it has a little paper label that goes all the way around it. This is before you had a paper label that you glue onto the can. So women were actually paid to paint on the outside of the can what was going, the contents of the can. The word humble means to be not cocky, not full of yourself, to kind of realize that you're not the greatest in the world, or to not be cocky is the best I can do with that. Okay, invalid means to be sick, to be unable to work or unable to go out in public, even maybe kind of kept at home due to an illness or injury of some kind. And then shirtwaists. Okay, so a little lesson on early 1900s fashion. This was before women, for the most part, had dresses that were made out of one piece of material. Instead, you had a skirt and you had a shirt. The shirt would go to your waist, and it would kind of meet up with the skirt, a lot of times in a point to kind of emphasize the woman's waist. But it meant that you could switch skirts and shirts and have different combinations at a time when a lot of women didn't have very many outfits to wear. So a shirt waist was the kind of the top part of that outfit. Yadva is small and delicate with jet black eyes and hair, the latter twisted into a little knot and tied on the top of her head. She wears an old white dress, which she has made herself and worn to parties for the past 5 years. It is high-waisted, almost under her arms, and not very becoming. But that does not trouble Yadva, who is dancing with her Mikolas. She is small, while he is big and powerful. She nestles in his arms as if she would hide herself from view and leans her head upon his shoulder. He, in turn, has clasped his arms tightly around her, as if he would carry her away. And so she dances, and will dance the entire evening, and would dance forever, in an ecstasy of bliss. You would smile, perhaps, to see them, but you would not smile if you knew all the story. This is the 5th year now that Yadva has been engaged to Mikolas, and her heart is sick. They would have been married in the beginning, only Mikolas has a father who is drunk all day, and he is the only other man in a large family. Even so, they might have managed it, for Mikolas is a skilled man, but for cruel accidents, which have almost taken the heart out of them. He is a beef boner, and that is a dangerous trade, especially when you are on piecework and trying to earn a bride. Your hands are slippery, and your knife is slippery, and you are toiling like mad when somebody happens to speak to you, or you strike a bone. Then your hand slips up on the blade, and there is a fearful gash. And that would not be so bad if it were not for the deadly contagion. The cut may heal, but you can never tell. Twice now, within the last 3 years, Mikolas has been lying at home with blood poisoning, once for 3 months, and once for nearly 7. The last time, too, he lost his job, and that meant 6 weeks more of standing at the doors of the packing house at 6 o'clock on bitter winter mornings with a foot of snow on the ground and more in the air. Okay, going back to that. Beef boner. Ha ha ha, get over it. It's exactly what it sounds like. It was the guy who takes the bones out of a dead cow, which is beef. I guess we didn't do that, right? So, we use a lot of euphemisms to put distance between us and the food that we eat. Instead of saying, I'm going to eat cow, we say, I'm going to eat beef. Once the cow has been killed, we now refer to it as beef. Pork is pig, chicken is chicken. For some reason, we don't euphemize that one. Those are the two main ones. Bacon is also pig. Hamburger, ham is technically pork, which would be pig, but a hamburger is usually beef, which would be cow. Sausage can come from multiple parts of any animal. We'll get a lot more into sausage later. Just to give you a brief on that one. The word toiling, your hands are slippery, your knife is slippery, and you are toiling like mad. To toil means to work at something that's not any fun at all. Sometimes hard work can be fun. Like, you might enjoy hard work sometimes, or at least feel like you're getting something out of it, or like have an appreciation for the hard work. If you are toiling, you're working really hard and it's absolutely miserable. And then contagion is infection. It doesn't have to be contagious infection, but what they're talking about here is blood poisoning, that they were using these knives, they weren't washing their hands, they weren't washing the knives, and so if you got a cut across your hand, a lot of times that would then get infected, you get blood poisoning, and you could die from blood poisoning, or sometimes lose a limb. There are learned people who can tell you, out of the statistics, that beef boners make 40 cents an hour, which would have been a really good wage for that point in time. So there are people who are like, well, they make a lot of money, they're rich. But perhaps these people have never looked into a beef boner's hands, meaning they're not taking into account the the risk that you put yourself into with that job. Okay, we're gonna skip ahead to page 20 now. We're still at the wedding reception. No one can get away from it, or even think of getting away from it. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, and they have danced out all their joy, and danced out all their strength, and all the strength that unlimited drink can lend them, and still there is no one among them who has the power to think of stopping. Promptly, at 7 o'clock this same Monday morning, they will, every one of them, have to be in their places, at Durham's or Brown's or Jones's, each in his working clothes. If one of them be a minute late, he will be docked an hour's pay. And if he be many minutes late, he will be apt to find his brass check turned to the wall, which will send him out to join the hungry mob that waits every morning at the gates of the packing houses from 6 o'clock until nearly 8:30. There is no exception to this rule. Not even little Ona, who has asked for a holiday the day after her wedding day, a holiday without pay, and still been refused. While there are so many who are anxious to work as you wish, there is no occasion for incommoding yourself with those who must work otherwise. Little Ona is nearly ready to faint, and in a stupor herself because of the heavy scent in the room. She has not taken a drop, but everyone else there is literally burning alcohol, as the lamps are burning oil. Some of the men who are sound asleep in the chairs or on the floor are reeking of it so that you cannot go near them. Now and then Jurgis gazes at her hungrily. He has long since forgotten his shyness, but then the crowd is there and he waits and watches the door where a carriage is supposed to come. It does not, and finally he will wait no longer, but comes up to Ona, who turns white and trembles. He puts his shawl around her and then his own coat. They live only 2 blocks away, and Jurgis does not care about the carriage. There is almost no farewell. The dancers do not notice them, and all of the children and many of the old folks have fallen asleep of sheer exhaustion. Dede Antanas is asleep, and so are the Seveliuses, husband and wife, the former snoring in octaves. There is Teta Elzbieta and Maria sobbing loudly, and then there is only the silent night, with the stars beginning to pale a little in the east. Jurgis, without a word, lifts Ona in his arms and strides out with her, and she sinks her head upon his shoulder with a moan. When he reaches home, he is not sure whether she has fainted or is asleep, but when he has to hold her with one hand while he unlocks the door, he sees that she has opened her eyes. "You shall not go to Brown's today, little one," he whispers as he climbs the stairs, and she catches his arm in terror, gasping, "No, no, I dare not! It will ruin us!" But he answers her again, "Leave it to me. Leave it to me. I will earn more money. I will work harder."